The electric keyboard is a great instrument that I love to use in my music because you have this nice clicky attack and definition on your chords, but then you also have a beautiful sustained tone that works perfect in the background. You can really use it in so many different genres, whether it's pop, different electronic styles, like house, funk, hip hop. It really can be used in any number of different genres. It's almost like a synth crossed with a piano in a lot of ways, so you get the benefits of both. And the really cool thing that I like to do is kind of change up the sound design a little bit. So the keyboard sounds familiar, but it also has a unique tone that keeps your music interesting and modern. I'm going to demonstrate how I use electric keys in my latest song, Hypocrite. And I'm going to first show the chord choice and good chords that you can use with electric keys. Then I'm going to show a little bit of the sound design that I did, how I modified the keys. And then finally, I'm going to show throughout the song how the keys evolve and how the sound design evolves. So you can really choose any type of chord progression with electric keys. However, I do think more jazzy chords sound really good with the electric keys. And I started the chord progression really simple here, so I just have an A minor. However, I have the fifth on top and on bottom. So add a little bit of mystery to the tone, add some weight in the bottom. So then the chord progression lifts up a little bit, but it's still minor. It's E minor here. And once again, I have the fifth on bottom. I also have the third on bottom. So there's two voicings of the third. Whoops. And then a fifth also. So this kind of pulls down the E minor closer to the range that the A minor is in, and just makes it a little bit different from the normal E minor that you would hear. And then it goes to a D minor 7 here, so this is the jazziest chord in the progression so far. It's also the most spread out chord. So this is kind of like the midpoint of the chord progression. And so you're kind of, if you just think of it like a story or an adventure, you start out kind of tame here, at home, getting ready to leave. Then you take a step out, and then here, you're really stretched out, you know. This is where you're in the middle of a battle, heading towards the climax of your progression here. For this chord, it's just a D minor 7, but the fifth is put up an octave to kind of add some of that spreading out effect, and then the seventh is here, right in between. And then you return back to the E minor, so you kind of are coming back home a little bit. This one, though, is a little different because it doesn't have the fifth. But it has the seventh, so it's an E minor 7th without the fifth, so it adds a little variety. And then the final chord is adds the most tension and the most dissonance to kind of bring you back home and draw you back into the home chord again. And this is the D minor 7 here. However, a couple of interesting things about this chord that I did to kind of spice up the progression a little. One is I first started with the 7th. So you don't exactly know what chord you're going to go into because the 7th is a little bit dissonant from the rest of the chord. And then I also added a second. So this is a D minor chord, but then it has a second way up here. And then the natural third, of course. And so there's extra dissonance here. A lot of tension. And so I highly recommend using both chords that have notes close together with dissonance, and then also more spread out chords, and to vary these throughout the chord progression. In addition to having that chord progression going for a lot of the song, in the verse I changed it up a little bit by adding an upper octave, a higher range of chords that kind of complement the other chords that are playing. These are also more rhythmic. So I'm just like accentuating some of the notes and kind of adding a little bit more motion to this part of the song. And I'm also using some delay and some Valhalla room reverb here, and then cutting out a lot of the lows and a little bit of the highs, so it's a little bit more ethereal, kind of floating up there in the atmosphere, while the other chords are a little bit more grounded. And then like at the end of the high portion here, there's a little bit of a rising up, so it kind of pulls you back into the next part of the progression. Sometimes you can combine different instruments playing slightly different notes for the chords, but just be careful because as you do this, it's easy to muddy up the mix. So a good way to do this is, if you have space in your mix, maybe put a secondary layer of chords on the high end. Now I'm going to go into more of the sound design that I use for the electric keys here. You can notice that I'm obviously using Bitwig, which is different from the DAWs that I'm sure a lot of you are using, you know, whether it's Ableton, Pro Tools, Logic, any of the other ones. The good thing about Bitwig is you can really get creative with modularity within the plugins. So figure out how you can do that within your DAWs. For Bitwig, I just chose the Rhodes preset here. And then, as you'll see here on the left, I have an LFO that's modulating both a little bit of the panning, so some micro panning, and then a little bit of the output volume, and some of the speed, which is basically the tuning of the chords here. So you'll get a little bit of that vintage feel with a little bit of detuning, and then you'll get a little bit of movement in the mix, left to right, and then a little bit of vibrato sounding, you know, volume that kind of goes along with the pitch change. You'll also notice that the frequency of this LFO changes. So I have another LFO that's modulating the frequency of this one. And what this ends up doing, like on this chord here, it starts pretty flat and in tune, but then it has a little more vibrations, a little more vibrato towards the end of the notes. So adjust this however you like. You can modulate whatever you want to do, whether it's certain elements of the envelope, whether it's, you know, the tuning, a little bit of the EQ. But modulation really adds interest, and it's pretty simple to do. Now I'll go through the plugin chain that I used for these chords. So I started out with cutting out some of the lows, and then I was EQing the highs out, kind of automating it from darker to brighter as the chord progression progressed through the song. Then I added a saturator. Pretty minor, but it just adds a little bit of high end, a little bit of warmth here. Then I EQ'd out some more of the mids and the lows and added some of the highs. So it's really easy to get muddy with any pad that you're using, so you'll have to be careful and EQ some of the mud out. Then I added the reverb. And this is Valhalla Vintage Reverb, which just adds to this nostalgic tone of the keys. I did the 1970s color and a concert hall at 1.5 seconds decay. And I did a little bit of EQ for the mud on this also. Then I added a chorus, which just makes it more wide, a little more dreamy in a way. And I used the Guitar Stomp plugin to do that. And then I compressed everything out just gently with the H comp stereo. Flatten out the chords a little bit. And then I added the center stereo, which kind of magnifies the chorus effect and the spreading out to leave a lot of room in the middle for vocals and the bass and drums. Now I also have some sends for these chords. So I have a doubler here. So it adds a little bit of width. And then I have a delay here that has some chorus on it. Okay, finally I want to talk about how these electric keys evolve throughout the song. In the very beginning, I have a master effect which has some phaser, some distortion, a little bit of doubler, and some EQ. So that's just for the first couple bars, and then it kind of opens up. So you start with more of an atmospheric beginning before you kind of hear the juicy part of the chords. And then you go to the main sound of the chords, and then in the build-up, I wanted to add some variation, have some contrast. So I turned the reverb way up, and that's just that same Valhalla reverb here. So I turned that up a bit. Gives like a really distant feel to it. So just adding a lot of different variation throughout the song, adding some contrast. So I hope that gives you guys some ideas of how you can use electric keys in your songs. You can also check out my other song, Feather, which I made a few months ago, and that has electric keys too. So I highly recommend using electric keys. They're really versatile. They have some nice clicky attack to them and form, but they also have the elongated pad type of feel to them, and they're really jazzy and funky. So try out some electric keys in your next song and see what you can do with them. I always say this in my videos, but make sure to just get creative, get unique with your sound design. Try out some of the things I'm saying, but then infuse it with whatever cool instincts you have musically. Also, this little bugger.
Oh, cute. That's a cutie. Yes.